Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The rain had started in the early morning, casting a persistent gray haze over the city. It was an unusual sight in a place where the sun typically rained, but perhaps it was a sign of change, a prelude to the storm of events about to unfold. Arthur gazed out the window of his modest townhouse, watching the drops streak down the glass. The city beyond looked different now, quieter, more uncertain. The announcement from the Magic Council had sent shockwaves through every corner of society, and the tension was palpable. Popular elections, he muttered under his breath, the words still foreign to him even after days of discussions. For centuries, the Magic Council has been the domain of the elite, the aristocrats who held power through ancient bloodlines and arcane secrets. But now, everything was changing. The council had decreed that future members would be chosen not by heritage or wealth but by the will of the people. It was a revolutionary idea, one that excited the commoners and enraged the nobles. Arthur turned away from the window, his hand instinctively brushing the hilt of the sword at his side. He had spent his life perfecting the art of swordsmanship, earning respect not only for his skill but for his honor. He wasn't born into nobility, he had earned his place in the council through sheer determination. Now, as a candidate in the upcoming election, he was a symbol of this new order, an order that terrified those clinging to the past. There was a knock at the door, followed by the familiar voice of Lady Eliza. "Arthur, are you ready? The rally starts soon, and the people are eager to hear from you." He smiled to himself. Eliza had always been the one to keep him grounded. As brilliant a strategist as she was a mage, she had been by his side through countless battles and political skirmishes. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. "I'm ready," Arthur said, strapping his sword to his waist and donning a long cloak. "Let's go remind them what we're fighting for." The square was packed with people, their faces a mix of hope and uncertainty. It wasn't often that a figure like Arthur spoke directly to the commoners, and the crowd buzzed with anticipation. They had heard rumors of this new election, this chance to break the hold of the nobles, but it seemed too good to be true. Could one man, even a master swordsman like Arthur, really stand against centuries of tradition? As Arthur stepped onto the raised platform, the murmurs quieted. His presence alone commanded attention. He scanned the crowd, his eyes lingering on the faces of the workers, the farmers, the shopkeepers, all of them ordinary people who had never dared to dream of having a voice in the council. "My friends," Arthur began, his voice steady but powerful, "we stand at the edge of a new era. For too long, the fate of this city, of our world, has been decided by the few while the many were left to watch from the sidelines. That ends now. The Magic Council has decreed that every man and woman in this city will have a vote, a say in how we are governed. No more will power be the privilege of the elite. It will belong to the people." A cheer erupted from the crowd, but it was short-lived. Arthur could sense the doubt lingering in their hearts. Change, especially one so profound, was never easy. The nobles had ruled for so long that the idea of challenging their authority seemed impossible. Arthur continued, "I know what you're thinking. How can we, the common folk, stand against the wealth and power of the aristocracy? How can we fight for our rights when they have armies and magic at their disposal?" But I tell you this, true power doesn't come from gold or spells. It comes from unity. It comes from standing together, believing that we deserve better. As he spoke, he noticed movement in the crowd. His hand instinctively moved to his sword, ready for trouble. There had been whispers of assassination attempts, of nobles plotting to silence him before the election could even take place. He had grown accustomed to threats, but the stakes were higher now. His life wasn't the only one on the line. Suddenly, a figure darted toward the platform, drawing a concealed blade from within their cloak. The crowd gasped, and chaos erupted. Without hesitation, Arthur leapt from the platform, his sword flashing in the dim light. The would-be assassin lunged at him, but Arthur sidestepped the attack with practiced ease. In one fluid motion, he brought his sword down, disarming the attacker and pinning them to the ground. The crowd fell silent, watching in awe as Arthur stood over the defeated assassin. He pulled back the hood of the attacker, revealing a young noble, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can change the way things are?" The noble spat. "The council belongs to us. The commoners are sheep, and they'll never rule." Arthur knelt beside him, his voice calm but firm. "The people are not sheep, and you, like your kind, will soon realize that the world is changing whether you like it or not." He handed the noble over to the city guards and turned back to the crowd, his heart racing. It wasn't the first attempt on his life, and it wouldn't be the last. The nobles would stop at nothing to protect their power, even if it meant resorting to murder. Arthur took a deep breath and addressed the crowd once more. "This is what we're up against: fear, hatred. Those who benefit from the old ways will do anything to keep things as they are. But we cannot give in to their fear. We must fight, not with violence, but with unity and conviction. Together, we will make sure that this election happens. And when it does, we will show them that the people have the true power." The crowd erupted in applause, their doubt replaced by a spark of hope. Arthur could see it in their eyes now. Belief. The road ahead would be dangerous, but they were ready to walk it with him. Later that night, in the quiet of his townhouse, Arthur sat by the fire, his mind still racing. The assassin's words echoed in his ears. The nobles were desperate, more dangerous than ever. He had no doubt that Lord Cedric, the leader of the conservative faction, was behind the attack. Cedric had made no secret of his disdain for the election, and he was known for his ruthless methods. Eliza entered the room, her face serious. "We need to be careful, Arthur. Cedric's not going to stop with just one assassin. He's playing a long game, and he'll use every trick in the book to stop this election from happening." Arthur nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "I know. But we're not backing down. The people are starting to believe in something bigger than themselves. Cedric can't stop that. He can't stop all of us." Eliza smiled, though her eyes remained wary. "You're right. But we need to be smart about this." "The duel. It's coming. Cedric will challenge you soon. He'll use the ancient laws to try and settle this the old-fashioned way." Arthur stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkened streets. "If he challenges me, I'll accept. But this fight isn't just about me. It's about all of us. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure the people get their chance to vote." The days that followed were tense. Arthur barely had a moment's rest, moving from one meeting to the next, always with an eye on his surroundings, knowing that danger lurked in every shadow. The nobles had grown bold. There were more attempts on his life, more subtle than the brazen attack in the square, but no less deadly. Poisoned food, enchanted arrows aimed from rooftops, and once, a spell cast by a seemingly friendly supporter that would have turned him to stone had Eliza not intervened in time. But Arthur's resolve only hardened. Every attack was proof that they were on the right path, that the old ways were crumbling under the weight of progress. The people were rallying behind him. More and more commoners came to the rallies, eager to hear him speak, eager to be part of something bigger than themselves. In their eyes, Arthur saw hope, and it was that hope that kept him going. Still, the challenge loomed. Arthur knew it was only a matter of time before Lord Cedric made his move. The duel was inevitable. Cedric was too proud, too entrenched in the old ways, to let the election go unchallenged. The ancient laws allowed nobles to settle political disputes with combat, and Arthur, despite his status as a candidate, was still seen by many as an upstart, an outsider. A duel would be Cedric's way of proving that only the aristocracy had the right to rule. The night before the duel, Arthur sat alone in his study, the fire casting flickering shadows across the room. His sword lay on the table before him, freshly sharpened, its edge gleaming in the dim light. He had fought many battles in his life, but this one felt different. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future. If he lost, everything they had worked for would be undone. The nobles would claim victory, and the people's hope would be crushed. Eliza entered quietly, her expression unreadable. She crossed the room and sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You're ready, aren't you?" she asked softly. Arthur nodded. "I've never been more ready." She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You'll win, Arthur." "I know you will. But be careful. Cedric isn't just another noble with a sword. He's dangerous. He knows magic, a dark magic." "I know," Arthur said. "But so do you. You've taught me well." Eliza placed a hand on his arm. "Magic isn't everything. This fight will come down to more than just skill. Cedric will try to manipulate you, to provoke you." "Don't let him." "Stay focused." "I will," Arthur promised, though he knew it would be easier said than done. Cedric had a way of getting under people's skin. He was arrogant, cruel, and above all, convinced of his own superiority. The duel would take place in the Grand Hall of the Magic Council, an arena that had witnessed countless battles over the centuries. The laws governing duels were strict. Once the combatants entered, there would be no interference. The fight would continue until one yielded or was killed. As dawn broke, Arthur made his way to the council hall, Eliza by his side. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual bustle of the city replaced by a tense stillness. People watched from their windows, their faces pale with worry. They knew what was at stake. If Arthur fell, so too would their chance at a fair election. The hall was already filled by the time they arrived. Nobles and commoners alike had gathered to witness the duel, their breath held in anticipation. At the far end of the hall stood Lord Cedric, flanked by his supporters. He was a tall man, his silver hair neatly combed back, his robes adorned with the insignia of his house. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Arthur the moment he entered the room. "So, it's come to this," Cedric said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've made quite the spectacle of yourself, haven't you? Rallying the commoners, pretending they have a place in the council. It's pathetic." Arthur stood tall, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "The people deserve a voice." "That's not a spectacle. It's justice," Cedric sneered. "Justice? You speak of justice while challenging centuries of tradition. You think you can tear down the very fabric of our society with your petty notions of equality? You're a fool, Arthur. And today, I will show you just how foolish you've been." Without another word, Cedric drew his sword, its blade etched with ancient runes. A dark aura seemed to pulse from it, the air around them growing heavy with the weight of the magic it contained. Arthur unsheathed his own sword, the familiar weight of it steadying him. He could feel the tension in the room, the eyes of the crowd fixed on them, waiting for the first strike. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, Cedric lunged, his blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Arthur parried the blow, his muscles reacting instinctively, the clang of steel on steel ringing through the hall. Cedric was fast, faster than Arthur had anticipated. His attacks came in a relentless flurry, each strike aimed to kill. But Arthur held his ground, blocking and dodging with the grace of a seasoned warrior. He could feel the dark magic in Cedric's blade, each impact sending a shiver through his arm, but he pushed the sensation aside. He couldn't afford to be distracted. The duel raged on, the two combatants locked in a deadly dance. Arthur's swordsmanship was flawless, but Cedric's magic gave him an edge. Every time Arthur thought he had the upper hand, Cedric would unleash a burst of dark energy, forcing him back on the defensive. But Arthur wasn't fighting alone. Eliza had trained him well, teaching him how to counter even the most dangerous spells. As Cedric summoned a wave of black fire, Arthur called upon the protective wards Eliza had woven into his sword. The flames collided with the magic, dissipating harmlessly around him. "You've learned some tricks," Cedric said, his voice low and menacing. "But it won't be enough. You're out of your depth, boy." Arthur didn't respond. He knew better than to be drawn into Cedric's taunts. Instead, he focused on the fight, his movements precise, his mind clear. He could feel the crowd watching, their hopes resting on his shoulders. He couldn't fail them. The duel reached its climax as Cedric, desperate to end the fight, unleashed a spell of immense power. The ground beneath them trembled as dark tendrils of magic surged toward Arthur, threatening to engulf him. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Arthur could see the fear in the eyes of the spectators, the smug confidence in Cedric's face. But Arthur wasn't done yet. With a roar, he raised his sword high, channeling the magic Eliza had taught him. The blade glowed with a brilliant light, cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. In one swift motion, he brought it down, severing the tendrils of magic and striking Cedric's blade with such force that it shattered. Cedric stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. He had never expected this. He had never believed that a commoner could defeat him, that someone like Arthur could possess such strength. Arthur stepped forward, his sword leveled at Cedric's chest. "Yield." For a moment, Cedric said nothing. His pride, his arrogance, held him in place. But as he looked around, as he saw the faces of the peoply nobles and commoners alike, he realized that the fight was over. The old ways were crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "I yield," Cedric said, his voice barely a whisper. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising like a wave that swept through the hall. Arthur lowered his sword, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had done it. They had done it. The people had won. As Cedric was escorted from the hall, Arthur turned to face the crowd, his heart swelling with pride. The election would go forward. The people would have their say. And for the first time in centuries, the Magic Council would belong to them. Eliza joined him, her face beaming with pride. "I knew you'd win." Arthur smiled, though the weight of the victory still hung heavy on his shoulders. "It's not over yet." "But we're one step closer." As the cheers of the crowd echoed around them, Arthur knew that the fight for justice was far from over. But for now, they had won a victory that would be remembered for generations.